900 years ago, in what is today Quebec, Canada, lived the Algonquin people. They had many villages along the St. Lawrence River, and in one of those villages lived a strange boy. His name was Machetu. His mother had passed away when he was very young of an illness, and his father, Dakota, was a respected hunter in the village. Because of this, Dakota spent a lot of time on long treks outside the village, and Machetu had a lot of time to himself. Like his father, he showed the promise of being a skilled hunter and fisher as well, and when he was around 10 years old, he had 3 friends, Mookie, Nutau, and Seganem. Seganem was the boy in the group who took the greatest liking to Machetu, while Mookie and Nutau, a couple years older, thought there was something wrong with him. He had an unusually wide mouth and flat, straight teeth, and while the elders encouraged cooking or smoking of meat, Machetu preferred it raw. One night, while the 4 boys had been out camping, Machetu disappeared from the group, only to be found with a hair in his hands. He had broken its neck and was biting into its haunch with the fur still on. He showed no shame as the older boys teased him, chewing the meat, swallowing it, and gnashing back down in another large bite. Seganem thought it was funny and couldn't stop laughing, but the older boys went home and reported Machetu's strange behavior to their parents. They thought he was disturbed, and through the grapevine many of the other elders caught wind of Machetu's strangeness. But the older boys liked Seganem, and so the 4 continued to hang out, one day venturing off on a trip to the river to fish. Seganem caught 1 fish, Mookie caught 3, and Nutau caught 4. But Machetu caught a whopping 7 fish and earned the respect of the group. The sky became dark, and thunder and lightning rolled through the forest. The boys loaded the fish into a woven basket, and Nutau, the fastest runner, flew ahead of the group on his way back to the village. Seganem, the weakest link as usual, was slowing the other boys down. Through the pouring rain, Mookie called out to Machetu, asking him if he could run on ahead and leave Seganem in his care. Machetu nodded and smiled, and Mookie ran off to catch up with his brother. The older boys watched out the door of their wigwam as the storm raged on. An hour went by, but Seganem and Machetu never appeared. They informed the adults, and a search party went out in the rain. But they didn't make it that far into the forest before Machetu came running up to meet them. He appeared to be crying and trembling as the adults questioned him, but he claimed not to know where Seganem was or what happened to him. There was blood in his teeth and dripping down his chin. He said that he had slipped in the mud and bashed his mouth against a stone. He was instructed to run back to Dakota's hut as the rest of the adults continued the search. Nutau, watching from his hut, noticed that the expression of sadness on Machetu's face fled as soon as he left the adults' company. Instead, his smile cracked open wide into a face of glee. The search for Seganem continued tirelessly, but it wasn't until 2 weeks later that his body was discovered. He was found face down, bent around the root of a tree poking into the river. His flesh was full of human bite marks, and chunks had been taken out of his cheek, arm, and thigh. It was clear that no animal had done it. It was clear it had been Machetu. Mookie, Nutau, and a group of adults and elders showed up at the entrance to Dakota's hut. There were odd, squeaking and chirping noises coming from inside it, and upon entry, they found Machetu crouched over. In the darkness, he was biting the hands off a live squirrel. The squirrel's tail was naked. It looked like the fur had been plucked from it. The squirrel's claws were scratching at Machetu's cheeks and ripping away at his tongue, but he didn't seem to care. His eyes rolled back in his head as he bit down. The adults seized him, many asking for permission from the elders to kill him on the spot. But at that moment, to Machetu's good fortune, Dakota, his father, arrived back in the village from a hunt and demanded to know what was going on with his son. The chief of the village, who had been on the hunt with Dakota, followed close behind him, and the elders explained that Machitu had likely killed a boy and was found eating a squirrel alive. Dakota burst into tears, so full of regret that he had not been there for his son. He begged the chief for the chance to discipline Machitu through hard work, to allow Machitu on hunts with them, to keep watch over him. The chief had great respect for Dakota and honored his request, with the understanding that any more of this behavior would have dire consequences. Dakota thanked the chief profusely, and the adults in the mob walked away angry. That night, in their wigwam, Dakota asked his son, "Did you really kill a boy?" Machitu looked like he was holding back a smile, and then replied simply, "Yes, father, and I tasted his flesh." Again Dakota wept, for he knew that what they said about his son was true. He was disturbed, but he looked so like his mother, and Dakota loved him so dearly. He buried his pain in the next week, as the father and son took off on a hunt. Dakota pleaded with his son to be on his best behavior during the hunts, and Machitu agreed, knowing that death was the most likely outcome for carrying out his urges. But as the boy reached puberty, his hunger grew, and his appetite became insatiable. Dakota taught him how to track moose and deer, and after a long day of hunting and contributing to the meat supply of the tribe, Machitu went off hunting again on his own, sneaking away from the camp in the forest, devouring animals by moonlight. His gullet had grown so wide that he could swallow a squirrel whole and live, but he also took great pleasure in holding down a doe and burying his teeth into her guts. Dakota was aware of his son's behavior, and the few times his absence was noticed, he made excuses for him, saying that he had gone off to find water or defecate. Machitu grew into a large man, the largest in the tribe, and although on hunts he continued obeying the chief's orders, the other hunters were wary of him. He stood a head taller than the tallest of them. His wide lips were covered with ulcers that when he opened his mouth revealed a bouquet, and his breath always smelled foul. There wasn't a light behind his eyes the way there was with other people. Somehow, he seemed more beast than man. He was strongly disliked in the village when not away on hunt, and even at his massive size, he still hungered. He was still growing. Machitu couldn't stop himself. At night, he would sneak into the storehouse and eat many meats and grains, although when smoked they didn't match the flavor profile he craved. Nutau, now a grown man with a family of his own, advised his children to stay far away from Machitu. Muki, however, now also a grown man with a family, took pity on Machitu and would pay him visits to reminisce about the days when they were young. Muki didn't really believe that Machitu had killed Seganem. He hadn't seen what his brother had seen. But one day, while on a walk in the forest, Machitu just couldn't help himself. It had been so long since he had tasted raw flesh, and as Muki spoke to him about life, he knocked him to the ground, held him down, and started eating him live, taking large, ravenous bites out of Muki's face. Muki's blood-curdling screams echoed into the village, and men with spears ran over, piercing Machitu in the back. He got up and bellowed, looking with fury down upon them. "Enough, Machitu!" the chief yelled from the center of the village, and Dakota stood beside him, looking ashamed and heartbroken. Dakota was shaking his head, and Machitu decided to stand down. He was brought before the elders, as the chief felt that over the years he had grown partial to Machitu. The elders agreed that he should be put to death, but one elder, an old woman, argued in his favor. She took pity on him, having grown up without the love of his mother, and convinced the other elders to exile Machitu. He was stripped of his name and left to live like a beast in the wild. Dakota was forbidden to talk to him or interact with him, and especially was forbidden from providing him with village resources. But shortly before giving up hunting, Dakota saw his son in the wild one last time. He was the size of a moose and walked on all fours, naked. There were antlers sprouting from his head, and his pupils were horizontal bars like a goat's, but still his mangled, ulcerated face reminded Dakota of his child's mother. The Wendigo and the man made brief eye contact before the beast slipped between the trees, never to see his father again. Hey guys, thanks for listening to that story. That was, of course, the prequel to my other Wendigo stories, so feel free to check those out. And thanks for the request, that was a really good idea. Subscribe for more original creepypastas every Thursday. And until next time, embrace the beautiful dark.